Thank you for being here today. It's really great to be able to see your faces. If you hopped in a little earlier, you might have heard me say this, but I'm going to say it again in case you miss it. It is a blessing to be here with you and so many friendly faces of folks that I've known for so long, for quite a while now, which we will not reveal the time now because, time is passing, but such are my friend Marcelo. I also saw Mircia, saw Marisa over here as well, Ricardo, folks that we have seen for a good time, and other people like Bruno himself that I always interact with in social media too. So I want to say hi to all of you and thank you for inviting me here, for making time for me to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. If that is okay with you guys, today, what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation about a topic that I'm clearly biased about. It is Paul's transformation, and I call that Our Road to Damascus. And the interesting piece here today, I'm going to do something a little bit different in terms of logistics, if that's okay with you. I am not going to share a presentation. I am going to share the presentation in my little square here. So if you are in there, look, I'm going to do this. Can you see it? See? So it might be easier for you to just pin my screen if you want to see in full screen, so you can see the whole thing. And the reason for that is because it's late in the day, I don't want you to just see a big presentation and a little head, right? And put you to sleep more normally than I would otherwise do. And that's one of the wonderful things about virtual presentations is that you guys can no longer throw tomatoes at me because I am virtually distant from you. So I get to be safe here today. But my plan is to talk for about 35 to 40 minutes, but sometimes I do carried away. Who am I kidding? I always get carried away. But I'm going to try to do the honor of the 40 minutes, and then we'll have some time for us to interact, because I think that's the really great part and the really fun part, not about the topic, but also about Spiritism in general and the group. This is an opportunity for us to interchange and exchange thoughts and ideas. Would that be okay? And let me tell you a little bit about the elephant in the room, right? So the topic here is Our Road to Damascus, and we are going to talk about all of that fun stuff. But I think that the elephant in the room here that I do want to make sure that you understand right from the beginning is that I do have a book that I just wrote about the topic. So I will be talking about that. I don't want you to feel like this is a sales pitch. That's not my intention whatsoever. My intention is to share with you a little bit of the insights and my thinking process about writing the book, because we cannot possibly talk about the entire book and all the contents of this topic in just 1 hour. At least I can't, because I get too excited about it, like I said. So I want to just do broad strokes and share with you a little bit about the book. And if you feel inclined, you can always go read the book, borrow from somebody. And if you're up to it, and if you are able to withstand this presentation to the end, our friends at JAS have okayed us to go ahead and give you 1 or 2 copies. We're going to do a drawing and see who gets to have a book if they want to. Does that make sense to you guys? Is that okay? Well, so let me just say then from the beginning that this book is really special to me because there's a little bit of me in it, but it's really not about me. Don't worry, it's not about me. But what I'm excited about, and I should tell you, because I just heard it a couple of weeks ago, I haven't shared with people yet, is that the book actually got an award. Yay for the book. It's a silver medal from the Illuminations Book Award for 2021. It's a Christian contest where Christian books that talk about Christianity go in there. So I'm excited to share that I can now say that the book is an award-winning book, which is really exciting. But what excites me the most is this wonderful review that we got here at the bottom. I don't know if you can read it there, but Kirkus Reviews says it's one of the most influential reviews out there, and they say that this is a book that succeeds in the tricky feat of being intriguingly spiritual without being explicitly religious. And that makes me really happy because my intent from the beginning was to really talk about spirituality, but not about religion itself. And why do I say that? I say that because the entire premise of our thinking for today is really about Paul the Apostle's travel from Jerusalem to Damascus. And within the Christian tradition, that is generally understood as a moment of conversion, where Paul converts from Judaism to Christianity. And I think that can be it. Yes. But I want to look at it differently. I don't want to look at it as a religious moment or a religious undertaking. It's really a moment of personal transformation that has spiritual implications. So during the book and during our talk today here, we're really not going to talk about religion per se, but we're going to try to revisit some of these interesting things that we can learn from one person's experience and how they change their lives, right? And I think it's important for us to say that the reason why I picked Paul to begin with was because Paul is a really well-known figure in our history, right? We hear about Saint Paul, right? We have heard, cities be named after him, cathedrals, pieces, works of art, amazing things, and we always hear about Saint Paul. Apologies. And we also know that he's been called the apostle to the Gentiles. That is the messenger to those who are not Jew, right? And it is really an interesting thing for us to talk about for a quick second here, because we are thankful to Paul for a lot of things, including knowing Christianity or the Christ, or even the Bible as we know today, because it is through the writings that were actually found outside of Jerusalem that we now have the books in the Bible, and the New Testament more precisely. They were all found in Greek, and for them to have been found in Greek, it means that somebody had to write them in Greek, and you can imagine that the Jews at the time in Jerusalem did not write in Greek, right? So it is because Paul and other people like Paul made an effort to talk to people who were different than themselves that eventually we found these old manuscripts that gives us the New Testament. And if you might remember your New Testament studies, the New Testament, which is the second part of the Christian Bible, it's composed out of 27 books. 27 different books make the New Testament. And out of those 27 books, we have 4 Gospels, right? Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. We have the Acts of Apostles, and we have tons of letters. And a lot of those letters are letters by Paul. In fact, 13 of these letters are his or attributed to him. Scholars debate whether he wrote all of them or not, but apologies. But the point is, 13 of these letters are attributed to him, and the Acts of the Apostles, it also talks quite a bit about his journey, right? So when you look at it, half of the New Testament, half of what we know about the passage of the Christ and the teachings of the Christ have Paul's direct hand in them. So Paul is an incredible figure for us in the Western tradition, whether we are Christian or not, because a lot of our ethics and our thinking process is due somehow or connected to his voyages and his lessons and his thinking. And Paul traveled the entire world, known world at the time, to do that. He would put to shame even the most prolific frequent flyers of the time. And there were no planes back there, which means he didn't have to deal with Wi-Fi problems or bad food, but it did make his journey a lot harder, right? So this is a quick map of some of the journeys that he went to. He really made his life to go out and talk to people about this new way of looking at life, which was the teachings that this incredible spirit, the Christ, has left us 2,000 years ago. But why do I say all of that? I say all of that because sometimes in our studies, we forget that before Paul was Paul, he was first Saul. And that's why I find so important and so impactful for us. Because the interesting thing here is that we forget that before he has done and accomplished so many wonderful things, he was somebody who, like us, was trying to make sense of the world. In fact, if we are going to go ahead and start taking a look at his travels, and the different things that we're going to lead on the road to Damascus, and we will soon do that, it's important for us to kind of say a little bit about that journey, but also recapitulate or go back and summarize a little bit who was Saul at a point in time. And why do I say that? I say that because Saul was as a young man, a relatively young man, who was athletic, who was really smart, spoke many different languages, was really dedicated and really believed in divinity and serving others. So much so that he really studied the Jewish law at the time. And, I'm going to make a quick parenthesis here to say that, remember, at that time, there really wasn't a distinction between laws and religion for the Jewish people. They were all one and the same, right? So he was really devoted to this whole God thing, and he made his life's work that devotion and that dedication. And it's a really important thing to see, because sometimes we think that these stories are so far removed and they might not connect with us. But my whole argument here today is that his story is actually more connected to our story than we can imagine. And so by saying that, I want to say that Paul was really young. He was smart. He was really dedicated. He had just lost the love of his life. And before she passed away, after many different dramas and different things that happened, which I would urge you to read this wonderful book called Paul and Stephen, which is an amazing narration. And in that book, it talks about his journey to Damascus. It's just a little piece of it. But nevertheless, I find it very interesting. And you can listen and hear about his story and read it for himself much better than I can tell it. But what's important to me, and I think hopefully for us here, is that as we find himself traveling to Jerusalem to Damascus, we know that by this time in his life, he has achieved the highest rank that one can achieve, basically, as his job. He has become a member of the Sanhedrin, the highest Jewish body, right, order in the land. We also know that he's very dedicated to hunting down, people who they believe at a point in time are diverting people away from God's message. There has been an interesting cult that was born at that time. Some people started to believe in the teachings of this prophet from Nazarene that had been killed called Jesus. And more people were changing the way they thought about life by listening to preachers who were talking about Jesus and moving away from the traditional Jewish teachings. And Paul's journey was to go ahead and make sure that that didn't happen. This one is in particular an important one because he's going from Jerusalem, where he was, to Damascus, which is in Syria, about 150 miles away, searching for one specific man whose name was Ananias. Ananias was an early preacher. And this one was a specifically important journey for him because Ananias was also the person who had talked to the love of his life, Abigail, before she passed, and that led her to change perspectives and convert, so to speak, to Christianity. So this one is a little personal to him because he lost his love of his life, and he was also very frustrated and angry that she converted to Christianity. So I think Ananias was a great scapegoat for all the frustration and pain that he was feeling. And so he decides to commandeer a couple of friends, 3 of them, or at least 3 people who worked for him, and take this journey to Damascus and go through a road like this. And this road here in Damascus is no different than it was back then. It's really kind of what it looks like. There are no, as you can tell, there are no gas stations, no convenience stores, no Motel 6s along the way for you to stop, no guarantee of food. It is a long journey. And because of that journey, you take your food and your provisions with him. So we know that he, took horses, he took 3 friends. There's also safety in numbers. He was an important person, and he undertook in that journey. And that journey by foot, as you might imagine, and by horse, would probably take about a week. And what we know, and this is where I think it gets really interesting, and all the context, I think, hopefully helps place things in perspective. But what I think find really interesting is that as he's getting close to Damascus, we know through the Acts of the Apostles, one of those books in the New Testament, that a light, a different kind of special light, shone itself to Saul while he was riding to Damascus. And it was such a light that it dazzled him in such a way that caused him to fall down onto the floor, which was very painful, as you can imagine. If you ever fell off from a horse, and I have, it's not a pleasant activity. And he fell down in a road like this one. And there he was, and he felt the presence of something greater. And he asked what that was, and he answered that it was Jesus. And in that moment, he has a short dialogue that many of us know. He realizing that his life is about to change, that the way that he has lived his life before, that which he was persecuting was perhaps not what he should really be fighting against. He asks Jesus, Lord, what should I do now? What would you have me do? He hears an answer from Jesus that he should continue to go to Damascus and wait, because then he will get to know more things after that. And then he comes back from this mystical experience and hears even something even more interesting. When he kind of snaps out of that moment, he notices that his companions have not had the same experience that he has. He is the only one that has seen the Christ in that moment in time. And you might imagine how his companions were worried about him because he's on the floor crying, or hurt at least, and saying that he has this mystical experience, and none of them have. So they probably think that maybe the sun got to him, right? They've been riding in the desert for a while. What do they do with the boss? They should take him back to Jerusalem where the doctors are, or where he lives, and make sure he's okay. He's an important guy, right? He argues with them. He says he wants to go forward. And here's a kicker, friends. He is blind. He can no longer see. And they are even more worried when he tells them that, right? Long story short, two of them return to Jerusalem to tell people what has happened. One of them, knowing that he's really stubborn, decides to go with him because he cannot walk blind on the desert by himself. They go to Damascus. They get there. They look for some place to take him in, somebody to stay with. There were no hotels, so it would be normal for him to be hosted by somebody. He was an important person. It would have been a lot of people who wanted to host him. But as he talks to them and tells them about what happened and about his new interest in the Christ, guess what happens? None of those people that were his quote friends or connections are really interested in hosting him anymore, because they fear there might be a political backlash. So he ends up having to find an inn, a place to stay, which in that time was either a back room in somebody's shop or office, or somebody's extra room in their home. It wasn't that great. It wasn't a Marriott, people. It wasn't a Hilton, right? He gets there. Eventually, he releases the last person that was with him, because he knows that that person is now getting worried that others might think that he too believes in the Christ, and he doesn't want people to think that. And so he stays by himself without really eating or drinking for a couple of days, until guess who shows up to help him? You nailed it. Ananias, the person whom he was persecuting, has had an encounter with the Christ himself. And I can only imagine the conversation, by the way, where Christ shows up to Ananias and say, Ananias, go to that inn on the street called Straight and help Saul. And Ananias goes, do you want me to help that one who's persecuting and having people killed? Are you sure? Are you sure, Lord, that that's the one I'm supposed to help? That's the kind of conversation I would have with Jesus if he showed up in that point in time, right? And, a testament to Ananias, he does, obey, so to speak, the calling, answer the calling, goes there, give Paul some passes, and guess what happens? Paul returns, his sight returns to Paul, and Paul goes through a period of reflection and eventually starts his journey to become Paul, right? This great speaker and person who shared the teachings of the Christ. But why do I say all of that? Because this seems almost like a fairy tale, doesn't it? It seems almost like this is a make-believe story. But if you think about it for a second here and, translate that to everyday life, we can say that if Paul was alive today, maybe he would have been a very important business person out on a business trip. And during that business trip, as he's traveling, because he's a workaholic, he's been dedicated to his life, he realizes that everything that he has worked to up to that moment no longer clicks. And now he has a decision. His job, which he thought was awesome, it's not that great anymore. In fact, it might be hurting people. In fact, he knows he has hurt people. So what does he do? Does he leave his job? Does he go back to the way he was before and ignore his new knowledge? What does he do? Well, we know the end of that movie. We know who Saul became, right? Paul. But what I find most interesting here, if you have the patience to listen, and I haven't put you to sleep just yet, is for us to talk about 7 different items for reflection. 7 different things or symbolisms that happened to Paul on his way to Damascus, and that little story that I told you, that I think also can happen and do happen to us in our lives. And the first one here, because our time is getting shorter, because as I told you, I get excited and I over speak. A couple of things here that are interesting. So on that journey, the first thing we notice here and learn from Paul is that he was in a group, but he felt alone. And why do I say that? He was on the road with his team of friends and colleagues from work, but only he had the vision. And I wonder if that doesn't also happen to us in our lives. When we have a group of friends with which we go through life, maybe our family members, maybe our loved ones, but sometimes some things happen in our lives, some events unfold in a way that we are called to awaken spiritually to something else. And that happens to us and not to the whole group at once. And that is a really difficult thing for us to digest, because we are used to being in a group together, and all of a sudden we realize that those people around us, maybe they're a family, maybe they're colleagues, they don't understand why we are going through that moment in time. They seem not to understand our pains or why do we want to do things differently. So it feels lonely. It feels like we are alone. It feels like we are forgotten. So if we find ourselves in this moment in time, especially during these times of COVID, or these times when we are thinking about what is it that I want to do with my life, and you feel like nobody else understands you, please remember Paul. It was not because he was not cared for, or that you were not cared for or loved, and that you abandoned him. That's not it at all. It is just that personal change happens individually. It is your choice on how to and if you change. And that means that you are the one who has to make those decisions. And it's hard sometimes to make those decisions by yourselves. But the truth is, the credit and the merit is yours if you make those decisions. If somebody else makes those decisions for you, then it's not your decision, is it? So these moments sometimes, although they may feel like they are isolating you, they are really just preparing you for changes that are going to come. So if you find yourself lonely, don't think that you've been abandoned, but just think about Paul and say, I might be in the beginning of a moment of change that's about to happen, just like it presented itself to Paul. Does that make sense? So Paul's example may help us understand that change is personal and non-transferable like a credit card. We have to deal with it. And that's, I think, the first lesson that we learned from Paul. The second lesson that I want to talk about a little bit as well, as we're going through the road here with Paul, is that change sometimes happens through destabilizing meetings with life. Sometimes we think that our spiritual evolution, our growth, is going to come in mystical and magical moments where perhaps the sky will break open, the sun will be shining, and angels will come down from the heavens playing harps, right? And and all of a sudden you're going to be a better person. But the truth is that quite often change comes about through hardship. When we are faced with difficult moments, maybe because we haven't heard life's calling for us to do something different, we haven't really changed ourselves, in previous ways, life gives us a curveball so that we are forced to change, or at least consider changing. In this case, it was a meeting with Christ that called his attention, that literally threw him off his horse onto the ground. If he had changed his perspective before, maybe he would not have that meeting with the Christ. He would not need it. But he was going in a way that it was so perhaps damaging to his future self that he needed a spiritual intervention. So when we go through challenges in our lives, we can also think of them as our spiritual interventions. We can also ask ourselves, why are these challenges presenting themselves to me? Most of the time, when we are faced with a challenge, we think it's a punishment from the divinity if we believe in God, or we think it's a happenstance, and we just see that as a negative thing. However, if we look at Paul's story, and if we also understand the idea of God and good spirits as we do in Spiritism, we know that God has to be kind and good, otherwise God would not be God by definition. That means that every challenge that comes your way and my way is indeed an opportunity for growth, because we would never receive a challenge that is beyond our means to meet it. Because if God gave us a problem that is beyond our ability to fix it or solve it, then God would be mean, and God would not be God. So it follows that every challenge is a compliment. It's God whispering in your ear saying, you can do this. You are ready to face these challenges in your life and overcome them. Now, they might not be solved as you want them to be solved, as I want them to be solved, right? Let's be honest here for a second. But there is a solution for them, and there is a lesson for them. So I think that the second lesson that we take away from Paul is that change often comes through difficult moments, through destabilizing meetings with challenges. And if we're able to shift our thinking to the spiritual, we can understand these challenges and burdens as opportunities for growth, and a compliment, like I said, from life saying, you are ready to face this. I cannot help, my friends, but think about COVID when we talk about this. This is a moment that has changed the whole of humanity, but we are ready and we will overcome this moment. The question will become, what will we do with this time? What are we going to learn from this? I'm excited that many of us are starting to get vaccinated already. The numbers are dropping, and I love that we're making progress on the COVID situation. But I'm also thinking, what can we think and take with us to the next steps in our lives? What does this opportunity teach us? Because if we just go back to what we was before, then perhaps we've missed a great opportunity for change. But I'm going to stop babbling there for a second and move on to the third lesson that we may learn from Paul. And I call that the courageous question. When he is down on the ground hurting and he understands that that which he has been doing is no longer going to work for him, something interesting happens. What does he ask the Christ? He doesn't go and say, I am sorry, I didn't know it was you, I didn't know who you were, apologies. If I'd known, I wouldn't have done that. I am really sorry, I just didn't know, you can't blame me, right? I might have said those things to Christ if I were in his shoes. But Paul, knowing that he needed to change, did not waste any time in excuses. He did not try to justify what he has done, the things that he has done before. He accepted that he needed to change, and he accepted that he did not know how to change. So he asks, what would you have me do? And you see, these was one of the most powerful men of the Jewish world at the time. To be able to take that stance with life is one of incredible courage. And I ask myself, am I courageous to make that question out of myself? To say, I don't know. Maybe I don't know what I should do next. What should I do? And maybe go to prayer. Maybe ask for clarity. Maybe seek feedback from other people. But that's a courageous question that sometimes we avoid. We avoid really facing ourselves and asking the question if we want to change. And what is it that we should do? And I think in this time of ours, it might be a good place for us to reflect on what are the things that we need to work on or could work on, and whether we really want to do those. And I'm going to stop babbling here because I know time is short, but I think you got an idea of how beautiful and how impactful this question can be in our lives. And the next question here that I want to take us to on the road to Damascus. And the next lesson that we learn is this lesson of the temporary blindness. And why do I say that? I say that because after Paul, or Saul still, saw the light, figuratively speaking, he became blind. And it's not uncommon for us to, when we are exposed to a new way of thinking, feel like we are blind too. Maybe when we first began to really pay attention to Spiritism and realize that we are immortal spirits who reincarnate as many times as we have to, maybe that created some confusion in us. Because now, all of a sudden, hold on a second, the world isn't necessarily like I thought it was before. Maybe my priorities are not the same anymore. It feels very confusing. It feels like I don't know where to go. I've lost my bearings. It's like you are spiritually blind for a second. You don't know what to do. And if you find yourself in that spot in your life where you don't know what's up or down, you don't know where to go, and you know you need a change, then think of Paul and know that you are not alone. And know that it is a natural process of growth to have to deconstruct the way we saw the world before so that we can see it differently with new eyes. To make space for the new, we have to let go of the old. We can't just get the new and let go of the old. We wish it was like that. We wish we could just get the new job and then let go of the old job. We wish we could get the new partner and then let go of the old partner. We should get the new home and then let go of the old home. Or whatever it is, you get my idea. Sometimes we have to take a leap of faith. We cannot hold on to two things at the same time. We have to let the old selves go to make space for the new. And that's confusing. And that's really hard. So if you find yourself confused, don't think that you're abandoned alone. Again, you may be in this moment of change. You may be in this moment of rethinking how life can and should be. And I think that it's a beautiful moment, a very difficult one, but I hope that Paul brings some solace to our hearts when it comes to that. And then we take a breather, because another difficult one comes. Another difficult learning and difficult lesson that we take away from all of this comes. And his decision to go ahead. You might remember Paul in the road after he's got the vision. He realizes he's blind, and his friends want him to go back to Jerusalem. And what does he decide? He decides to go to Damascus. And what a hard decision that is. Because I think we can agree that if we were in that position, we would think about going back to Jerusalem. We would think about going back to our homes and saying, when I recover, when I feel better, I will continue my journey. But symbolically speaking, and this is what I find fascinating and how courageous Paul was, he understood that the decision to go ahead was an important one, because Jerusalem in that moment symbolizes our old way of being. And Damascus symbolizes everything that is out in the future that we want to, all the possibilities that have not yet fully realized. And we have to make a decision. When it's time to change, will we choose the comfort of the things that were before and how we were before? Or will we go ahead even if we don't know exactly what is that going to look like? Change requires that at times. It requires us to see whether we're going to make a decision out of comfort or out of conviction. Am I going to do something because I believe it is right? Or am I going to do something because it's easier for me? Wow, what a powerful lesson Paul tells us. What an example. He just didn't speak about it. He did it because he decided that he was going to go forward even if he could not see, even if he did not know what's going to happen. He was only told, go ahead, go to Damascus and wait. He wasn't given the full GPS, right? The whole turn-by-turn directions. He didn't get the turn-by-turn directions. What he got was just one direction at a time. He said, go north, and in 300 feet, turn right. That's all he got, right? He just believed that at the end, he was going to arrive somewhere, and how hard that is for us, but how impactful that could be. So we're all faced with moments where we have to decide whether we want to go back to the people that we were before or whether we want to move forward into something new. Again, I make a parallel to our COVID times, where as a society, I think we're going to have to make a decision. Do we want to go back to the society and the group of people we were before? That's the easy part. But friends, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, the world as it was before COVID wasn't the best world ever. It wasn't working for everybody. We weren't all happy before. So I wonder if it's time for us to make a different decision even after this pandemic is gone. Can we treat each other more kindly? Can we make better decisions? Can we try something new? It's up to us. Can we put our conviction ahead of our comfort, our individual comfort? I think that is a really beautiful and powerful lesson that Paul's asked us to reflect as we take stock of what's been happening. Now, that's the fifth lesson. And I know our time is short. And you can tell I like talking. So for your sanity, we're going to keep moving. Otherwise, you're going to have to be here with me for 17 hours and ain't nobody got time for that. All right. So the sixth piece here that I want to bring to us is some good news. Until now, we've been doing a lot of internal work, right? We've been thinking about confusion, purpose, conviction, blindness, and pain in new direction. But I also want to remind us, and myself too, that we get unexpected help along the way. Much the same way Paul got unexpected help from Ananias. Isn't that beautiful? Because for Ananias to find Saul in that inn, in a street called Straight, as the Act of Apostle tells us, somebody must have been following Paul's footstep to be able to tell him Ananias where to find him. And that person was the Christ. That is a beautiful symbol that our spiritual friends continue to always know where we're going and what we're doing, and that they always send help even before we really need. And it always arrives where we need it. Had Ananias arrived before Paul got there, maybe Paul would not have had the time for reflection. So maybe if the solution to our problems arrive before we really have time to deal with them, what would we learn? And one more thing, and I will shut up about this one, which I found really powerful, is Ananias was the person he was persecuting to begin with. Isn't it ironic or meaningful that it was indeed Ananias who actually helped him solve the problem that he had? So the thing that he hated the most, the thing that he sought to persecute, that he wanted to exterminate, was actually the thing that helped him the most. And so I ask myself sometimes, what is my Ananias? And I invite you to join me in that question. What is your Ananias? What is that thing that perhaps we don't want or don't like, but that may help us grow? And never forget, for a second, that there is help for you out there, that their spiritual friends and guides are always there to support us, because there's always unexpected help. And in that vein, we continue here so that we have time to chat a little bit afterwards as well. The seventh lesson that I'm going to talk briefly about, and of course, if you want to revisit those more detailed and dive deeper, we can talk about it. You can try the book. You can reach me offline so we can continue to have this conversation. But the seventh one is a powerful one too. I call it a different Damascus. You see, the Damascus that Paul was going to was very different than the one he arrived at, even though they were the same city. But I think you can agree with me that what he thought he was going to find in Damascus was not what he did find in Damascus. And I wonder sometimes if we don't go through the same process where we set goals for ourselves and we say that happiness looks like this. Happiness looks like that relationship, that car, that job, that title, that whatever we think it is. And when we get there, it's not the same anymore, and we realize that our priorities have changed. And that's okay too, because it also changed for Paul. So don't feel like you have to want the same things that you wanted 20 years ago. Not that you guys are 30 years, because I know you're much younger than that. But do you get my drift? Make time to also reevaluate what is your Damascus. What is most important to you? Where is it that you are going to? Many of us don't even make time, to reflect about our goals. I sometimes, think to how I spend more time brushing my teeth every day than thinking about myself as a spiritual being. And what's more important to me? So it's an interesting moment for us to reflect about this idea of goal and perspective. And to wrap things up here, because we're coming up on time, when we understand that, when we think in different ways, when we think with our spiritual selves and kind of actualize all this wonderful knowledge that we have got gathered from many different places, but especially through Spiritism, when we realize that we are immortal beings, our life transforms itself. And that's why I'm reminded of this beautiful quote by another evangelist, John, in which he says, in John 11:25-26, he says, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even though they die, will live. And whoever lives by believing in me shall never die." Do you believe this? And I say this here and now, because Jesus had no ego. So he's really not speaking about himself. He's speaking about his teachings. He says, whoever believes in his teachings and immortality of the soul and the resurrection and the life, and the fact that we are going to resurrect and live as many times without ever dying spiritually. He says, whoever believes in this, even though they die of the physical body, will live in spirit. And whoever lives by believing in me shall never die, because we will understand that there is no death. And then he asks this wonderful question, do you believe this? So what is in our hearts? Are we willing to take that step like Paul did as well? And I put that quote in there too, because I think in this moment of fear and pandemic and so forth, there has been a lot of anguish and anxiety about death and so forth. And it's important for us to remind ourselves that in this journey to Damascus, whatever it may look like, when we add the spiritual component to it, it makes it a lot easier for us to understand the road. It makes it a lot easier for understand why we are here and now, and to follow, hopefully, in Paul's footsteps, and understanding that though we may not be physically walking to Damascus, we are allegorically walking towards happiness and fulfillment and purpose and meaning and whatever that may be for you. And so I'm excited that we have so many footprints left by so many amazing people before us to show us the way and tell us that their suffering and their challenges, even if 2,000 years ago, are still very relevant today to us. They speak of their challenges with their jobs, with their relationships, with finding meaning and purpose, which is what we're still doing here today. So if by any chance, at any moment in time, you find yourself feeling alone, even though you're surrounded by people, you are hurting because something happened to you, and you are really grappling with courageous questions inside of you. If you feel confused, maybe lost, right? You are not alone. You have to make a decision whether you are going to go forward towards this transformation that is upon us, or whether we are going to go back to the way we were before, only to eventually make our way back to the same spot in this life or in the next one, to be faced with the same decision again. And never forget for a single second that there's always help along the way, that you are never alone. And that's why I call on this idea of the road to Damascus and on Paul himself to continue to bless our ways forward, to know that it is possible for us to take a step back, reflect, and see that there is a pattern to how change happens and how things may present them in our lives. And I hope from the bottom of my heart that this may help someone know that they are not alone, that they are changing, they are progressing, they too are on their road to Damascus. And with that, I stop right there and see if we still have time. If not, I am sorry, because I just babble my way through it.